Hi, I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is the Candice Malcolm Show. We have a great episode for you today. I'm going to jump right into an interview. I'm so pleased today to be joined by Kevin O'Leary, Canadian businessman, investor, and television personality. Kevin, great to have you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have an election. Mark Carney has officially dissolved Parliament, and we are into a 5-week election, the shortest one, I believe, in Canadian history, the shortest one that is allowed. So, what is your impression of this short election campaign in front of us?
It's very unique, this situation. You know, first of all, it's very important because we're in a bad place right now with our largest trading partner, the United States, and there's no federal mandate yet. There's no one to go and negotiate. The provincial leadership has been going back and forth to Washington now for about 6 weeks, province at a time. So the premiers are not having much success because the administration there knows that they can't do a pan-American deal. And so it's very chaotic. In addition, we're seeing a lot of flexibility or movement in the tariffs out of the United States. A better schedule supposedly being drawn down on April 2nd, including 15 countries, that the major focus will be on wave one, and Canada's in that group. So it's important that we have this election and we choose a leader. Now, which leader to choose is going to be a very interesting contest.
Well, it's interesting because if you would ask Canadians 2 months ago, everyone was dying for an election, and the top issues were all to do with cost of living, cost of housing, immigration, everything related to just how unaffordable Canada has become. In the last 2 months, Kevin, it's switched, and the number one campaign issue, according to Canadians by polling, is Donald Trump and the tariffs. So he's totally thrown a wrench into the entire Canadian political system. Do you think that's having the intended impact that he wanted?
I don't think he necessarily cares how it affects other countries' situations. You know, it's not just Canada that's going through this twisting and turning. We know that Britain, France, Switzerland, Mexico, as well as, almost 11 other countries are going to have the same issues. But we're in a unique situation because we're in an election, yes. So it's very fortuitous for the Liberals to have this because they were trailing so much in the polls, and now we have polls that are neck and neck. And so this is an important campaign period to hear the messages from both leaders about how they're going to deal with Trump. But I think what's going to happen, and it'll happen pretty quickly, it's not just about Trump. Canada's in trouble. It's declining economy, as measured by numbers over the last 10 years, are frightening in terms of foreign capital invested, GDP growth stalled out, debt per capita. No matter what you measure, it has dropped from second quartile to the very bottom of the G7 and bottom quartile of the G20. So something's wrong in our policies. And I anticipate these policies will be revisited during the campaign. Obviously, Trudeau is gone, but the policies that he put in place from the original mandate, majority mandate he had, those policy makers, Gerald Butts, Telfer, Chief of Staff, Freeland, they're all still there. So, which surprises me. I'm really surprised. I would have thought if Carney would have got rid of the deadwood so he didn't have that baggage on him, because I am sure that Pierre Poilievre will make sure everybody realizes it's the same old Liberals 2.0 as part of his campaign pitch. And he has a point there. I mean, when you bring Gerald Butts back into the story, the guy that wrote the laws that wiped out foreign investment to energy infrastructure and mining in Canada and all kinds of other projects, as he took back the rights from provinces to issue permits, particularly around power, this was catastrophic for Canada. And I don't know if you recall, but October 2023, and I know this because I'm an investor, most foreign capital avoided Canada for the last 7 years, including Canada's own pension plans. We don't invest in Canada anymore because we can't. The permitting process is 7 to 19 years. Nothing goes forward. That's all the Liberal policies from Butts and Telfer, Freeland. And so I can't, they'll be back on the hot seat. They'll be looking at those policies and saying, we're just getting more of the same. We've got to sweep house.
Well, I hope so, because I think that the media in Canada and the Liberal Party would be more than happy to run a 5-week campaign talking about nothing but Donald Trump and the threat from American tariffs. I think it's incumbent upon independent media and the Conservatives as well to talk more about Carney and his ties to the Liberals, as you mentioned. One thing that I find interesting, Kevin, and I'll get you to comment on it, is that Mark Carney's own company, Brookfield Asset Management, moved its headquarters to New York just after Donald Trump was elected. Of course, Carney was part of that decision. But if you look at the balance sheet of that company and you look at the profits that they've made, they've had incredible growth in the United States in investing. And in Canada, their investments have shrunk. So even before the move happened to try to change the stock index or whatever it was about, they were still voting with their money essentially to invest in American products and in American infrastructure and companies, and to leave Canada. What does that say about Mark Carney?
It says the policies of his party, the Liberal Party, were not good for the country. It's not just Brookfield. Every sovereign wealth fund, from the Norway right through to the UAE, the Saudi funds, all of them, the largest pools of capital on earth, used to put in about 2.5%, 3%. We're about 2.5%, 3% of the world's GDP. We got indexed that way, but pretty early on in the Trudeau Liberal policy campaign, that got brought down to zero. And so nobody invests in Canada anymore, including Brookfield. And they, as you say, moved their headquarters. It's catastrophic in terms of what happened. Now, it will really be, as you've pointed out, important in the debate between leadership, because if Carney comes in with the same policies, and every indication from what I can see, keeping the same staffers around that wrote these policies, I can't believe that would be good for him, unless he thinks he can ride the Trump wave right into the prime ministership. And maybe he can. I mean, we'll wait and see how this goes. But I think this is going to be a wild ride. If you look at the sweep in other nations away from the same kind of, for lack of a better word, elitist Davos climate change type narrative that Carney has championed for years, is that really what Canada wants? I don't think so. And I think he has to be able to try and change his spots or his colors pretty quickly, because he is a Davos elitist, and people know that about him. And that's how he wanted to be known. More passports than I have. I don't know how long he spent in Canada until recently, and whether he's ever bought any eggs or bread in a Canadian grocery store. I have no idea.
Those are good questions. And, if only he would allow independent media into his press conferences, we would try to ask him those questions. But of course, he's more tied down, more strictly tied down than even Trudeau was with regards to a free press. You mentioned that Mark Carney will try to run the campaign against Donald Trump. I just want to play this quick clip, Kevin, and get you to react to it. So Mark Carney said that Danielle Smith's endorsement of Pierre Poilievre, so Alberta Premier Danielle Smith has come out and endorsed Pierre Poilievre. And Mark Carney says that endorsement indicates that Pierre Poilievre is aligned with Donald Trump. And so therefore a vote for Pierre Poilievre is a vote for Donald Trump. Let's play that clip and I'll get you to respond to it.
With respect to the Premier's comments, I take note of her alignment of Monsieur Poilievre with Mr. Trump, and would note that that's one of the decisions that Canadians will have to make, whether they want a government that is unifying, that's standing up for Canada, and is taking focused action to build a better economy, or they want division and Americanism. And that's what Mr. Poilievre seems to be offering, and just endorsed by the Premier of Alberta.
So what do you make of that, Kevin?
I find that quite humorous, because a strong economy in Canada would be based on energy and energy exports. And Alberta has almost 4 times the reserves of the entire United States in just oil alone. And where do they export it to? The United States. It's the #1 trading partner. So to suggest that it would be a good idea to cut that off, or not to engage with the largest trading partner during these difficult times, would be very foolish. And I think in saying that, he is actually dividing Canada in negotiations with the U.S. to purchase oil. You may recall And I'll point this out. Daniel Smith actually was one of the first premiers to go to Washington before the inauguration, meet with Trump, and has been, I think, rewarded with a 10% tariff proposal, not a 25%. And yet Carney did something that put him back, I think, maybe months, if not years, or maybe in a very unenviable position for Canadians by snubbing the American administration and getting on a plane and going to Europe, when the tradition for over 100 years has been to acknowledge the White House the minute an interim prime minister comes into power. That was not missed by the American administration. They are very unhappy with that. And I think trying to elevate that tension is a very foolish strategy on Carney's part, because as people have learned, whether you like Trump or not, they certainly have got to know him over 12 years, he takes it personally. Very foolish if you don't understand that. So for all of Carney's, and I applaud his resume, he's impressive, but he doesn't get it. He is completely out of sync with what it's going to take to negotiate with Trump and understand how important it is to work out this deal with a country that buys 75% of our output. So the reason that we got in such a bad place in the first situation was, if you recall back in the first mandate Trump had, both Trudeau and Freeland could not stop bad-mouthing him all around the world. That was stupid, because they thought Trump would never return to power. He did, and he made it his first mandate to make sure that he called, and this all started by calling Trudeau the first governor of the 51st state. He was just sticking it back to Trudeau, and people don't understand that. That was how toxic that relationship got. It was completely dysfunctional and not good for American people or Canadians. And Carney is doing exactly the same thing. I'm sure that'll be pointed out in the campaign. Very, very foolish, stupid. And he hasn't learned anything from what happened to Trudeau. He's looking like Trudeau 2.0 all over again, except this time on steroids.
Well, you say that it's a mistake and that he's doing it by accident. I think he's doing it intentionally. I think that the Liberals, they accuse the Conservatives of dividing and trying to Americanize politics, whatever that means. I think that the Liberals need a divided Canada. They need a weak Canada. And if you look at the polls again, Kevin, you see that Canada is just so incredibly divided. It's like East versus West, young versus old, men versus women. The split is really quite shocking. And I'll just want to tie it back to Trump one more time, because last week we saw Donald Trump. He was on Laura Ingram's show on Fox News, and then he repeated it later, that he would rather have Mark Carney be prime minister because he believes that the Liberals are easier to deal with. I read that to mean that he believes the Liberals are weaker, and that therefore the Americans can dominate and get a better deal.
The Liberal Party is going to win now in the next election, most likely. And they were down and out. Isn't that going to make them more hostile to us and possibly?
No, I'd rather deal with a liberal than a
for China, closer to Canada, and that would really put us in a bind.
The conservative that's running is stupidly no friend of mine. I don't know him, but he said negative things. So when he says negative things, I couldn't care less. I think it's easier to deal actually with a liberal. You know, a conservative until I got involved, because I don't care who wins up there. I frankly probably would do better with a liberal than the conservative, if you want to know the truth. But just a little while ago, before I got involved and totally changed the election, which I don't care about, probably it's to our advantage, actually.
How did you interpret those comments?
I'm sure that he actually doesn't care who wins in Canada. He's going to deal with whoever comes out on top. The people are actually doing the work in the negotiations. Howard Lutnick, one of them has already come out and said, look, whoever wins, we'll deal with them, because we can't do a pan-Canadian deal. Trump is just having fun throwing barbs at anybody that puts out negative social media at him. And that's been both candidates in Canada, frankly, because this divisive Rally for Canada call is very political. You're right. And does it work? My take on it all, in all the rhetoric that's occurring, is the average Canadian is not that stupid. And they understand the importance of having economic ties with the U.S. and many countries around the world. But to say that we're not going to do business with a country that traditionally for over 100 years bought 75% of our output, that's sheer stupidity. That has to be worked out. And to me, it's just a giant NAFTA 3 negotiation. And who do you want negotiating it for you? If you think Trump doesn't like Pierre, well, then you want Pierre, because he would be the stronger negotiator. But he's also conservative, so is the American government. It's not about one individual or another at the end of the day. And this is why Canadians, I think, are going to figure this out in this election. It's about the policies of the countries. Is it pro-business? Is it pro-growth? Is it pro-energy? All of these things matter because it's what made Canada wealthy and become a member of the G7 in the first place. And we stripped that all away over the last 9 years. And we took our numbers down. And the thing about numbers is they're not emotional. They're not affiliated with any political party. They're just numbers. And we have fallen to the bottom of the heap through poor policy. Now, do you want more of that? Because that's what it sounds like you're getting if you vote for Carney. You get more. It's just Trudeau 2.0, because he hasn't shown any interest, and maybe because he's never been a politician before, he doesn't want to take risk by sweeping the House. But remember, in the parliamentary system, same in England, the Prime Minister's role is to put the key people in place for each mandate. Now, let's just pick bringing back Freeland, for example, into cabinet. Can you think of one mandate she had in a decade where she wasn't a total failure, including finance minister, deputy prime minister? She's loathed in every country she negotiated in. We lost our visa status in Egypt, in India, decimated our relationship with China, a huge partner. She is one of the worst executives I've ever seen. I mean, if she was in one of my companies, I would have fired her a long time ago. And here she is back in cabinet. Huge mistake. I am sure that'll be focused on during the election. Telfer, she did some of the policies that wiped Canada out. And I mean, Gerald Butts, he wrote the decline of foreign investment in Canada in the very first mandate. In October of 2023, the province of Alberta litigated him to the Supreme Court and won their sovereign rights back to have some control over their own resources. That's how bad it is. Now, why would any Canadian, regardless of your politics, why would any Canadian want that crew back in charge? Unless Carney takes a spatula from heaven and scrapes them away, I think a lot of people in Canada are going to say, wait a second, why would we want this again? Thank you, Mr. Carney. You're a nice guy. You might have been a great finance minister, but you have no idea what you're doing when it comes to putting key people in place in a cabinet to turn Canada around.
Well, and you didn't even mention Stéphane Guilbeault or Bill Blair or some of the other disastrous cabinet ministers that are right back in with Mark Carney there. Well, Kevin, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time and you joining the program. Thank you for your time this morning.
Take care.
Okay. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm Candice Malcolm. This is the Candice Malcolm Show. Thank you and God bless.